What happens when an elderly man stands at a flower shop counter, trembling hands holding out a collection of coins as he tries to purchase his late wife's favorite roses? He's met with cruel laughter and mockery from a young clerk who can't understand why anyone would still pay in change. The other customers watch in uncomfortable silence as the old man's dignity crumbles before their eyes. But what nobody realizes is that among them stands a man in a black leather jacket, Keanu Reeves. And his next move will not only restore an old man's honor but transform an entire community's understanding of kindness. This simple act of buying flowers becomes a powerful reminder that sometimes the smallest moments of cruelty can lead to the greatest lessons in compassion, especially when an unexpected hero steps forward to defend what's right. Harold Matthews woke up to the gentle ticking of the antique clock on his bedside table. At 78, his morning routine remained unchanged, a habit carved from 52 years of marriage to his beloved Margaret. The early sunlight filtered through lace curtains she had sewn decades ago, casting delicate patterns across their bedroom, now occupied by just him. He shuffled to the kitchen, his slippers scraping against the worn hardwood floors. Every Saturday morning for the past 2 years since Margaret's passing, he prepared his breakfast the same way: one slice of toast, a soft-boiled egg, and a cup of tea served in the blue china cup Margaret had loved so dearly. Their modest home held a lifetime of memories. Photographs lined the walls, telling the story of their journey together. Harold's eyes lingered on their wedding picture, Margaret radiant in her simple white dress, holding a bouquet of pink roses. Those roses became their tradition. Every Saturday, without fail, Harold would bring her fresh pink roses, even when money was tight during the lean years of raising their children. Now, living on a fixed pension, Harold found himself counting pennies more often than not. The rising cost of everything had forced him to make adjustments, but he refused to break his promise to Margaret. Each week, he would save whatever coins he could, dropping them into an old mason jar labeled Margaret's Roses. Sometimes it meant skipping his afternoon coffee or walking instead of taking the bus, but Harold didn't mind. The roses weren't just flowers, they were his way of keeping their love story alive. Their children had offered to help, of course. Judy, their daughter, lived across the country with her own family, and Michael, their son, worked overseas. They both sent money occasionally, but Harold always returned it. "Your mother taught me that dignity isn't about having much," he would write back. "It's about making the most of what you have." Today was different, though. Harold felt a special weight in his chest as he counted the coins from his jar. It would have been their 53rd anniversary, and he had been saving extra coins for weeks to buy a larger bouquet than usual. The coins weren't much, mostly quarters, dimes, and nickels, but they represented countless small sacrifices made with love. He dressed carefully in his best sweater, the dark blue one Margaret had given him on their last Christmas together. His weathered hand smoothed down the front, remembering how she would straighten his collar, her touch always gentle, always loving. In his wallet, he kept a small photograph of her, smiling from their garden surrounded by her beloved roses. The cemetery was a 20-minute walk from their house, a path Harold knew by heart. Each Saturday, he would visit her grave, replace the previous week's roses with fresh ones, and tell her about his week. Sometimes other visitors would see him talking to the headstone, but Harold didn't care. In his heart, Margaret was still listening. What Harold didn't know as he gathered his coin jar that morning was that this Saturday would be different. His weekly ritual of buying roses was about to become more than just a widower's tribute to his late wife. It would become a moment that would touch hearts, challenge prejudices, and remind an entire community about the true meaning of dignity and respect. As he stepped out of his house, coins jingling softly in his pocket, Harold had no idea that he was walking into a story that would change not only his life but the lives of everyone who would witness what was about to unfold at Bloom and Petal, the city's most prestigious flower shop. Bloom and Petal stood proudly on Fifth Avenue, its elegant storefront showcasing exotic orchids and premium arrangements that attracted the city's most affluent customers. The morning sun reflected off the polished brass sign, making the boutique flower shop appear even more imposing than usual. Harold paused outside, clutching his jar of coins tighter, suddenly aware of how out of place he might look. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of fresh flowers and expensive perfume. Crystal vases lined custom-built shelves, each holding arrangements that cost more than Harold's monthly pension. Behind the marble counter stood Judy, the new clerk, adjusting her designer blazer as she arranged a display of imported lilies. The store wasn't busy yet, just a few well-dressed customers browsing the premium selections. A woman in a Chanel suit examined orchids while her husband checked emails on his phone. Near the roses, A tall man in a black leather jacket stood quietly, his long dark hair partially hiding his face as he studied the blooms. Harold approached the counter, his coins clinking softly with each step. The sound drew Judy's attention, and her perfectly shaped eyebrows arched slightly as she took in his appearance. The well-worn but clean sweater, the scuffed shoes, the jar of coins clutched in his weathered hands. "Welcome to Bloom and Petal," she said, her tone professionally distant. "How may I assist you today?" Harold smiled warmly, placing his jar on the counter. "Good morning. I'd like a dozen pink roses, please. The ones in the corner display would be perfect." Judy's eyes flickered between Harold and the premium roses he'd indicated. Those particular blooms were imported, commanding the highest price in the store. She cleared her throat delicately. "Sir, those roses are $60 per dozen." "Yes, I know," Harold nodded, beginning to unscrew the jar's lid. "I've been saving specially for today. It's my wedding anniversary." The first coin spilled onto the counter with a loud clatter that seemed to echo through the quiet store. Several customers turned to look. Judy's professional smile faltered as Harold began arranging the coins in neat stacks. "Sir," she said, her voice taking on an edge, "perhaps you'd prefer our discount section? We have some lovely carnations that might be more suitable." Harold continued counting his coins, his fingers trembling slightly but determined. "No, thank you. It must be the pink roses. You see, my Margaret—" "Sir," Judy interrupted, no longer bothering to hide her disdain, "we don't typically process cash transactions of this nature. Perhaps you could return with a credit card." The woman in the Chanel suit whispered something to her husband, both of them staring now. Harold's cheeks flushed red, but he kept counting. $25 in quarters, 18 in dimes. The neat stacks grew slowly. Judy let out an exaggerated sigh, pulling out her phone. "This is ridiculous," she muttered, just loud enough for others to hear. "Who even pays in coins anymore? What century is this?" The whispers around the store grew louder. Someone snickered. Harold's hands began to shake more noticeably, causing several coins to roll across the counter. As he reached to catch them, Judy stepped back as if the coins might soil her clothes. "Really, sir," she said loudly, "this is embarrassing. We have a reputation to maintain. This isn't some corner store where you can empty your piggy bank." Harold's voice quavered as he tried to maintain his dignity. "Please, young lady. It's all counted out. $60 exactly. These roses, they're for my wife. We always had pink roses." "Your wife?" Judy's laugh was sharp and cruel. "Well, I'm sure she'd be mortified to see you making such a scene. This is a premium establishment, not a charity case collection point." The silence in the store grew thick and uncomfortable. The woman in the Chanel suit had her phone out now, recording the scene with poorly concealed amusement. Her husband smirked, shaking his head at what he clearly saw as a pathetic display. Harold's shoulders slumped. 52 years of wedding anniversaries, of pink roses and gentle smiles, seemed to crumble under the weight of this public humiliation. His fingers trembled as he began gathering the coins back into his jar, each one representing a small sacrifice made with love, now transformed into symbols of shame. And then a deep voice cut through the tension, steady and powerful. "Leave those coins exactly where they are." Every head in the store turned toward the man in the black leather jacket, who had moved silently closer during the confrontation. He stepped into the light, removing his sunglasses, and the atmosphere in the store shifted instantly as recognition dawned on every face except Harold's. Judy's smug expression froze, then slowly dissolved into uncertainty as she found herself staring into the intense gaze of Keanu Reeves. The atmosphere in Bloom and Petal crystallized into something electric as Keanu Reeves stepped forward, his presence commanding instant attention. Judy's perfect composure cracked as she realized the gravity of her situation. She had just humiliated an elderly man in front of one of Hollywood's most beloved actors. "I asked for those coins to stay where they are," Keanu repeated, his voice carrying a quiet authority that made Judy's hands freeze mid-sweep. Harold looked up, confused by the sudden intervention, still unaware of who stood beside him. Keanu placed his hand gently on Harold's shoulder. "Sir, please continue counting your coins. These roses are important to you, and you have every right to be here." His eyes fixed on Judy, who had begun to fidget with her blazer sleeve, her earlier confidence evaporating. Judy attempted to regain control of the situation, forcing a nervous laugh. Mr. Reeves, I apologize, but store policy clearly states dash. Store policy? Keanu interrupted, his tone remaining measured but carrying an edge of steel. Show me where your policy says you can strip away someone's dignity. Show me where it says you can mock a man's love for his wife. The woman with the phone had stopped recording, her face now flushed with shame. Her husband suddenly found the floor fascinating, unable to meet anyone's eyes. The entire store seemed to hold its breath. Harold stood straighter, though his hand still trembled slightly. Young man, please, there's no need for daft. There's every need, Keanu stated firmly. He turned to address the entire store. Look at yourselves. All of you. Standing here in your expensive clothes, judging a man who saved coins, saved them one by one, to honor his wife's memory. Tell me, what's worth more? Your credit cards or his dedication? Judy's face had lost all color. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. The security cameras in the corner blinked steadily, recording everything. Someone near the door whispered, "It's going viral already." I've played many roles, Keanu continued, his voice carrying to every corner of the store. Heroes, villains, men of action. But the real heroes? They're people like this gentleman here. People who understand that love isn't measured in dollars but in consistency, in small sacrifices made day after day. Harold's eyes glistened with tears, not of shame now but of gratitude. He looked at his jar of coins with renewed pride. Each one represented a moment of choice, a coffee not bought, a bus ride not taken, all to keep his promise to Margaret. The store owner emerged from his office, drawn by the commotion. His face paled as he took in the scene. His premium flower shop had become the stage for a powerful lesson in humanity, with Keanu Reeves himself delivering the message. Sir, the owner addressed Harold, shooting nervous glances at Keanu, please accept our sincerest apologies. Your roses will be complimentary today. No, Keanu interjected firmly. This man came to buy roses with money he saved honestly. Let him pay his way, with every single coin. His money isn't just currency. It's a testament to love. Judy stood frozen behind the counter, watching as Harold resumed counting his coins. Each metallic clink now seemed to echo with purpose, telling a story of devotion that made her designer blazer and perfectly manicured nails seem suddenly meaningless. The owner turned to Judy, his expression grave. Miss Judy, please gather your things and come to my office. The implications were clear. Her actions would have consequences beyond this moment. But before Judy could move, Harold spoke up, his voice steady for the first time since entering the store. Young lady, when you're my age, you'll understand that the true value of money isn't in how you pay, but in what you're paying for. These roses? They're not just flowers. They're my promise to Margaret. And promises don't care if they're kept with coins or credit cards. The wisdom in his words hung in the air, making the premium flowers and crystal vases seem suddenly gaudy in comparison to the simple dignity of an old man's love. A month passed, and the incident at Bloom and Petal had become more than just a viral moment. Judy found herself sitting in her small apartment, staring at the countless notifications on her phone. The video had millions of views, but it wasn't the public shame that kept her awake at night. It was Harold's words about promises and their true value. After losing her job at the flower shop, Judy had hit rock bottom. The interview requests came pouring in, people wanting to hear from the heartless flower shop clerk who had mocked an elderly man. But instead of defending herself or hiding away, Judy made a choice that surprised everyone. She started volunteering at the local senior center, the same one where Harold spent his Wednesday afternoons teaching other seniors how to tend to the small garden they had started. At first, people were skeptical of her presence, whispering behind her back, but Judy persisted. She learned to listen to stories of love that spanned decades, of sacrifices made without complaint, of the kind of wealth that couldn't be measured in dollars. Keanu Reeves had done more than just stand up for Harold that day. After the incident, he had established a community fund for senior citizens, ensuring that no elderly person would have to count coins for necessities. But he made sure the program maintained dignity. Participants could volunteer at local organizations in exchange for credits they could use at various stores. Harold became an unexpected mentor to Judy. He showed her his old photo albums, told her stories about Margaret, and taught her the patience required to grow roses. You see, he would say, hands deep in the soil of the senior center's garden, flowers are like people. They don't care about the fancy pots they're planted in. They just need consistent care and genuine love. Judy learned that Harold had been a high school teacher before retirement, which explained his natural ability to guide without judgment. Under his tutelage, she discovered that the premium roses she once sold for $60 required the same care as the simple blooms in the center's garden. The price tag, she realized, had nothing to do with the flower's ability to bring joy. The community watched this transformation with interest. Some were skeptical at first, believing it was just an attempt at image rehabilitation. But as weeks turned into months, they saw genuine change. Judy started organizing flower arranging classes at the senior center, teaching seniors how to create beautiful bouquets from simple blooms. She used her knowledge from the premium flower shop to bring luxury to those who could never afford it. The owner of Bloom and Petal heard about these changes. He visited the senior center one day, watching from a distance as Judy patiently helped an elderly woman arrange wildflowers in a recycled jar. The same hands that had once dismissed coins now gently guided arthritis-stiffened fingers in creating beauty. Most surprisingly, Judy started saving her own coins. Not out of necessity, but as a reminder. Each coin represented a moment of patience learned, a story heard, a lesson in humanity gained. She kept them in a jar similar to Harold's, not to buy anything specific, but to remember that value isn't always visible at first glance. The transformation wasn't just Judy's. The entire community had changed. Other businesses started implementing dignity-first policies, ensuring that no form of payment would ever be mocked. Young people began volunteering at the senior center, eager to learn from the generation they had once dismissed as outdated. And in the senior center's garden, roses bloomed, planted with coins and kindness, growing on the fertile soil of second chances. On a crisp Saturday morning, exactly 3 months after the incident that changed everything, Harold stood before Margaret's grave, pink roses in hand. But this time, he wasn't alone. Behind him stood a small group of people, each holding their own flowers. Judy, several seniors from the center, and to everyone's continued amazement, Keanu Reeves, who had kept his promise to stay involved in the community. The senior center's garden project had blossomed beyond anyone's expectations. What started as a small patch of earth had grown into a full community garden, with dedicated sections for vegetables, herbs, and of course, roses. Harold's weekly visits to Margaret's grave had become a community tradition, with different people joining him each week, learning about his and Margaret's love story. Judy now managed the garden program full-time, funded partially by Keanu's foundation and partially by local businesses that had been touched by the story. The former flower shop clerk had found her true calling, using her knowledge of flowers not to sell luxury, but to create moments of joy for those who needed it most. Bloom and Petal had undergone its own transformation. The owner, inspired by the changes he'd witnessed, renovated the shop to include a community blooms section, where flowers were sold at reduced prices, and all forms of payment were welcomed with respect. The marble counter where Harold had once been humiliated now displayed a small plaque. Every payment carries a story. Every story deserves respect. Keanu's influence extended beyond the initial viral moment. He had quietly purchased the building next to the senior center, converting it into an affordable housing complex for seniors. The garden wrapped around both buildings now, creating a green haven in the heart of the city. More importantly, he had shown that celebrity influence could be used for lasting change, not just momentary viral fame. Harold stood before Margaret's grave, his voice steady as he spoke to the gathered crowd. Margaret always said that love grows like flowers. It needs daily tending, patience, and most of all, it needs to be shared. She would have loved this garden, but more than that, she would have loved seeing how it's brought people together. Judy stepped forward, placing her own roses next to Harold's. The roses she carried weren't the premium blooms she once sold. They were grown in the community garden, tended by hands both young and old. Harold taught me that the value of a flower isn't in its price, she said, her voice carrying across the quiet cemetery. It's in the love it represents. Keanu, standing quietly at the back, watched as other seniors came forward to share their stories. Each one had been touched by the changes of the past 3 months, whether through the garden, the housing complex, or simply the renewed respect they felt in their daily interactions with the community. The owner of Bloom and Petal was there too, having closed the shop for the morning to attend. He had learned that success wasn't just measured in sales figures, but in the impact you had on people's lives. His shop had become a model for other businesses in treating all customers with dignity, regardless of how they paid. As the gathering drew to a close, Harold revealed one final surprise. He pulled out his coin jar, not for roses this time, but for something bigger. "Margaret and I always wanted to start a scholarship," he announced, "for young people who show exceptional kindness and understanding towards seniors." Keanu stepped forward then, matching Harold's saved coins with a substantial contribution. The scholarship would ensure that Harold and Margaret's legacy of love and respect would continue for generations to come. Judy, standing beside Harold, realized how far she had come from that day at the flower shop. The designer blazer was gone, replaced by gardening clothes stained with honest work. Her perfectly manicured nails now carried traces of soil, and she had never felt more beautiful. As the group walked back toward the senior center, where a community lunch awaited, Harold lingered for a moment at Margaret's grave. "You see, my love," he whispered, touching the headstone gently, "sometimes it takes a moment of darkness to help us truly see the light. Those coins we saved? They bought more than roses. They bought a change in hearts." The coins that had once been a source of shame had transformed into symbols of dignity, respect, and the power of love to bridge generations. And in the garden nearby, new roses were blooming, tended by hands both young and old, each flower a testament to the truth Harold had known all along, that the greatest wealth lies not in what we have, but in how we treat each other. The autumn sun cast long shadows across the senior center's garden as Harold tended to the roses one quiet evening. The flowers had become more than just a memorial to Margaret. They were now a living symbol of how one small moment of confrontation had grown into a movement of kindness. Inside the center, a transformation was evident. The once sparse recreation room now bustled with activity. Photographs lined the walls, seniors teaching young volunteers about gardening, Judy leading flower arranging classes, and at the center of it all, a framed picture of Harold and Keanu from that fateful day at the flower shop. Judy had organized a special dinner that evening to celebrate the first recipients of the Harold and Margaret Matthews Kindness Scholarship. 3 local high school students who had demonstrated exceptional commitment to bridging generational gaps would receive funding for their college education. As Harold finished his evening routine in the garden, he noticed someone approaching, Keanu, who had flown in specifically for the celebration. The actor had kept his promise to stay involved, making regular visits to check on the community he had helped transform. "The roses are beautiful tonight," Keanu observed, helping Harold up from his gardening stool. Harold smiled, brushing soil from his hands. "Margaret would say they're showing off for company." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a single coin, the last one from his original jar. "I kept this one to remember." The senior center's dining room had been transformed for the evening. Tables were decorated with centerpieces created by Judy's flower arranging class. Each arrangement featured pink roses, naturally, grown in their own garden. The room buzzed with conversation as seniors and young volunteers shared meals together. Judy stood at the podium, no longer the proud clerk who had once mocked an old man's coins. Her face glowed with genuine joy as she introduced the scholarship recipients. Each student had their own story of how they had been inspired by Harold's dignity and Keanu's intervention. The first recipient had started a program teaching seniors about technology. The second had organized transportation services for elderly neighbors. The third had created an oral history project, recording the life stories of senior center residents. As Harold watched these young people accept their scholarships, he felt Margaret's presence stronger than ever. She would have loved this, not just the roses or the scholarships, but the way their story had sparked a chain reaction of kindness. Keanu took the podium last, his words careful and measured. 3 months ago, we witnessed how quickly judgment can tear down dignity. But we also saw how standing up for what's right can build something beautiful. Harold and Margaret's love story isn't just about roses anymore. It's about the gardens we can grow when we choose kindness over convenience, respect over judgment. After the ceremony, Harold walked slowly through the garden one last time that night. The roses seemed to glow in the evening light, each bloom a testament to patient love and careful tending. He stopped at a special bush, the one planted where he had first taught Judy about gardening. Judy joined him, holding 2 cups of tea. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the sun set behind the garden they had built together. "You know," Judy said softly, "I keep thinking about that day in the shop. How I almost missed learning all of this because I was too busy judging what I didn't understand." Harold patted her hand gently. "Margaret always said that life's greatest lessons often come disguised as our biggest mistakes. It's what we build from them that matters." As they turned to leave, Harold smiled at the small plaque newly installed beside the rose bush. It read, "Every coin carries a story. Every story deserves to bloom." Below it, embedded in clear resin, was that final coin from his jar. no longer a symbol of shame, but a reminder that love, like flowers, grows best when tended with dignity, patience, and respect. The garden would continue to grow, just as the community had grown. And somewhere, Harold knew, Margaret was smiling at how their simple tradition of pink roses had blossomed into something far more beautiful than they could have ever imagined.